Well, after months and months and months of rumors, it's finally here. And I'm actually holding Apple's newest streaming device in my hand. They're calling it the second generation Apple TV 4K, and it's bringing some impressive horsepower to the streaming device landscape. But it's also packing a new and potentially improved Siri Remote, so we've got a lot to discuss indeed. If you've been curious about whether or not a $179 to $199 streaming device makes any sense at all, we hope this video helps. This is a Cord Cutters News review of the Apple TV 4K second generation. And by the way, Apple did not provide us with this Apple TV 4K. We actually bought this one ourselves. But as with all of our reviews, all of our opinions remain 100% our own. So with that all said, let's dive in. Hardware and features. Okay, so here's what we're dealing with in this second generation Apple TV 4K. Front and center is an updated processor. We've moved from the A10X Fusion in the first generation 4K to a more modern A12 Bionic processor. Now that's not exactly a brand new chip these days. Apple first included the A12 Bionic in the iPhone XS and XR line back in 2018, and we've since seen it pop up in the 2019 era iPad Air and iPad Mini, as well as the 2020 iPad. Farther down the spec list, you can see what else this second-gen Apple TV 4K is capable of, including 4K HDR output with support for HDR10, HLG, and Dolby Vision. This new Apple TV also gets Thread support, which is a newer smart home protocol supported by Apple, Google, and several other companies. You also get Dolby Atmos support as well as an HDMI 2.1 port on the back. Now that's the newest version of the popular HDMI standard, and it allows for a whole lot more bandwidth that can enable some fancy new features if your TV also supports 2.1. However, so far we haven't seen much in the new Apple TV 4K's feature set that really takes advantage of that fancy new standard. There is mention of 4K HDR at 60 frames per second, but HDMI 2.1 actually allows for 120 frames per second at that resolution, so it's possible more advanced features are locked away for now. Of course, we're just a few days away from Apple's annual Worldwide Developer Conference, and it's possible they might announce updates to its TV OS software that could allow for higher-end features like 120Hz refresh rates, which would make the inclusion of HDMI 2.1 a bit more logical. And if you do want to get the most out of an HDMI 2.1 connection, you'll need to make sure your TV and HDMI cable also support the new standard. But if you just want to use your new Apple TV 4K as a traditional streaming device, it's also backward compatible, so you'll be just fine connecting it to displays that support older HDMI versions. For reference, here are the specs for Apple's lower-cost 1080p streamer, the 2015-era Apple TV HD, which lives on in the current lineup at $149 for a 32GB model. There's the lower spec A8 processor as well as an older HDMI 1.4 port on the back. Ethernet is also the less capable 10100 base T variety. In all, there's a pretty significant difference between the two streaming devices currently on offer from Apple. On the bright side though, the older Apple TV HD does now include the new Siri Remote, which we'll be detailing shortly. And now for comparison's sake, let's bring in another line of high-end, high-powered streaming devices that take up the $150 to $200 price point. It's NVIDIA's well-regarded Shield TV line, which hasn't seen a hardware update since 2019, but is still a more than capable streaming device in its own right. But this Apple TV update isn't just about updated specs, not by a long shot. In fact, arguably the biggest buzz around Apple's new streaming hardware updates centers on the included input device, a revamped Siri Remote control. So let's see what we're dealing with here. Now, I think it's safe to say the previous Siri Remote had more than a few detractors. There was the high cost, the glass top surface, the difficulty in telling which way was up without looking, plus plenty of other complaints. So as much as we were waiting for a new Apple TV, I think many were also hoping for a big improvement on the remote side. And so we have the new Siri Remote. It's easy to see the differences between this new option and the one it replaces. There's the aluminum enclosure wrapping around the entire device, and there's also a circular directional pad up top that doubles as a trackpad, which makes it a lot easier to know how you're holding it without looking. One criticism Apple hasn't really addressed, however, is the high cost to replace a remote, as this new Siri Remote is sold separately for $59. Now that's not exactly cheap, but of course this is Apple we're talking about. And as for how the new Siri Remote and Apple TV 4K itself perform, well, let's get into that next. Setup and performance. Once you open the Apple TV 4K, you'll be treated to the usual Apple unboxing experience. If you've purchased one of their devices in recent years, you'll likely be familiar with the packaging approach here, which aims to emphasize efficiency and minimal use of materials. So you'll immediately come face to face with the new Apple TV 4K, which retains its compact, rounded, square aesthetic. Elsewhere in the box is the new Siri Remote, some documentation, a power cord, and yes, some Apple logo stickers if you're interested. And in case you're wondering, no, there is no HDMI cable included in this particular package, so just make sure you have one available. Just a heads up there. Around back, you can see the second-gen Apple TV 4K continues its strong resemblance to the model it replaces. There's the gigabit Ethernet port, the HDMI 2.1 connection, and a spot to connect the power cord. If you want to compare that to other high-end streaming devices like the Roku Ultra or the NVIDIA Shield TV Pro, you'll likely notice there's no USB port for expandable storage on the Apple TV 4K, so just keep that in mind when you're considering the 32GB or 64GB models. As for setup, you have a few options here. If you have, say, an iPhone or iPad nearby, you can bring them close to the Apple TV to share your Wi-Fi and Apple ID credentials. That can make for an easy, straightforward setup process. But if you'd rather go the manual route, you can definitely do that as well. You'll need to plug in your Wi-Fi password and sign into Apple ID or sign up for one if you haven't done so already. With either route, it shouldn't take you too long before you're greeted by the TV OS home screen. It's a familiar look, especially if you're used to using Apple devices. There are large icons arranged in a grid with the top row dedicated to a customizable list of favorites. And the overall app selection is clearly one of Apple TV's strong suits. Pretty much every streaming and entertainment app you've ever heard of, and several more, are likely available through the onboard App Store, so it took us little time to load up our go-to services. We ran our Apple TV 4K on 1080p and 4K OLED displays, and every time we changed displays, it quickly and automatically added TV controls to the Siri Remote. Now, some of those TV-specific controls like volume up and down might require you to point your remote directly at the TV for them to register, but controlling the Apple TV itself can be done with the Siri Remote in really any orientation. And it might be unsurprising, but the second-gen Apple TV 4K easily handled all the streaming content we could throw at it, and that included movies in 4K and with Dolby Vision HDR enabled. And like some other recent devices, there's an option to run HDR output by default. But if that ends up looking unappealing to you, you can thankfully set the Apple TV 4K to SDR as standard, with HDR firing up only when called upon. Meanwhile, using that Siri button on the included remote resulted in some impressively fast search results. We were typically served with relevant content options within seconds of speaking. A strong performance indeed. Jackie Chan movies. Battlestar Galactica. Cord Cutters News on YouTube. As a streaming device then, the new Apple TV 4K is clearly capable. Of course, Apple's been pitching the Apple TV 4K as more than just a streaming device, and you'll definitely squeeze more out of your $180 to $200 if you're signed up for other Apple services, including newer options like Apple Fitness Plus and Apple Arcade. Now, it certainly can't compete with the PlayStation 4 or Xbox One, let alone newer options like the PS5 or Xbox Series X. But there are some fun gaming options to enjoy thanks to Apple Arcade. The mobile version of NBA 2K21 plays well on a big screen, even if it is visually a big step back from dedicated console versions. And speaking of gaming, using a controller is simple enough. We were able to connect a PlayStation 5 DualSense controller in a few seconds, and it helped make several games way more enjoyable. And it was also easy enough to control the home screen and other apps as well. And while we're talking about games, you'll also need to keep install sizes in mind too when you're choosing which Apple TV 4K to buy. NBA 2K21, for example, weighed in at just under 4 GB. And while other less advanced games require much less space, it's something to consider if you plan to download a ton of games. And aside from gaming, you might also find more value here if you're a frequent user of other Apple services, like HomeKit or iTunes for buying and renting content. You'll also be able to enjoy your iTunes music library through your TV as well, which could be a handy way to enjoy your playlist through your living room setup. In short, the more embedded you are in Apple's various ecosystems, the more opportunities you'll have to wring value out of your purchase here. As for performance metrics, we'll get into those shortly, but we wanted to talk a bit about what it's like using the new Siri Remote. Overall, it's quite usable, pleasant even at times. The all-aluminum body is comfortable to hold and isn't quite as slippery as I had anticipated. The new circular click pad features an outer ring that can be used for directional inputs, so you can press up, down, left, or right. And the center section can be used as a button as well. Beyond that, the entire surface acts as a trackpad, letting you quickly scroll through items and, ideally, make navigation more efficient and enjoyable. And when it works, it's fun to use, and that includes some amusing games like What the Golf. It does take some getting used to, however. Especially early on, we had trouble accidentally scrolling when we meant to press a direction instead. That sometimes led to scrolling past the item we wanted to select, which made some text entry tricky at times. We eventually got better at it, but if you find it too much of a hassle, you can turn the touchpad feature off and use the clickpad strictly for directional inputs. And speaking of changing things up, the display button on the Siri Remote opens up Apple TV by default. And we understand why Apple would do this. It does have a streaming service to push after all. But if you want to change that behavior, it's easy enough to switch it so that pressing that button brings you to the home screen instead. And that Siri button on the side is easy to find without looking, and it's conveniently placed for quick voice searches. Overall then, the new Siri Remote marks a significant improvement when it comes to comfort, design, and overall usability. It does take some getting used to though, and you do have the option to disable some of its more advanced features like the touchpad or accessing Siri. Performance benchmarks. But what about the second-gen Apple TV 4K itself? Does it have the performance to help justify that price tag? Well, let's see. So here's our standard cross-platform app sweep. This is where we load up each app in succession and time how quickly a device can load them. The test starts and ends with Netflix, in part to see if the device is able to load the app faster the second time through. And for reference, here's how some recent high-end streaming devices have fared in our testing. As you can see, Roku's 2020 Ultra currently holds the record in our suite with an average time of 75.74 seconds for the 10-app test. And really, any device with a score below, say, 100 seconds can be considered plenty fast, but it's interesting to see how they all compare. And now, how does the new second-gen Apple TV 4K stack up? Really well. Really, really well. Okay, so there you go. The new Apple TV 4K absolutely ran away with this test, scoring a total time of 37.16 seconds. It's safe to say that's our new record holder for this test, and it's more than twice as fast as that Roku Ultra. And while that is undeniably impressive, I'd caution that incredible app loading speeds probably shouldn't be your one and only consideration when looking for a streaming device to buy, especially when we're talking about options approaching $200. But if smooth operation and consistently swift app loading times are important to you, the second-gen Apple TV 4K is in a class all its own. Wrapping it all up. So there you go, that is our full review of the second generation Apple TV 4K, and thank you all so much for tuning in. If you're impressed by the Apple TV 4K's record-breaking performance and you're ready to leverage its ties to other Apple services and platforms, you'll find plenty to like here. And yes, a starting price of $179 for 32 gigabytes is quite a lot when compared to other perfectly capable streaming devices out there, so it'll be up to you to decide whether you think you'll get your money's worth from the device. If you're a first-gen Apple TV 4K user, I'd stick with that machine for now, as it remains a supremely capable machine. Plus, one of the most significant upgrades in this second-gen model is a bundled remote control, which is a problem you can solve for about $59. If all you really want is a solid streaming device, options like the NVIDIA Shield TV Pro, the Roku Ultra, and more might offer more bang for the buck even for existing Apple users. But if you want to enjoy that traditional Apple user experience in streaming device form, and maybe take advantage of its other capabilities, the second-gen Apple TV 4K is an impressive and capable package. For now though, thanks again for watching, and please do consider clicking those all-important like and subscribe buttons down below. My name is Philip Palermo, and we'll see you next time. Take care.